Mysterious islands. Journey out on the Great Lakes to stories lost to time. To islands that guard their secrets. Enter a forgotten realm of deceit and courage, of strength and perseverance in a water-bound world. Mysterious Islands, the book and video available from Lynx Images and from Chapters and other fine retailers.
Newfoundland, looming at the eastern edge of North America. Mythical and vast. Thundering cliffs and weary mountains. An island fortress against the sea. Battered by the gray Atlantic, Newfoundland seemed an unlikely place to attract the attention of the European world. The first bold Europeans to set foot here were the Norse, around 1000 AD. This ancient place, Lansa Meadows, is the only authenticated Viking site on the continent. By the late 1600s, while the North American hinterland was still a great unknown, tens of thousands of fishermen were sailing to Newfoundland. The bounty of Newfoundland's waters drew the outside world to its shores and drew Newfoundland into European affairs. Newfoundland factored in European politics and in European wars. This rugged island, able to withstand the Atlantic's fury, was about to be battered by new storms. The storms of man. Much of Newfoundland's story is bound to one fish. Bountiful stocks of cod captured the imagination of the Old World. Cod, not beaver, would become North America's first major export. When the Venetian explorer John Cabot claimed Newfoundland for England in 1497, he was astounded by the bounty found in the waters off the island. He reported that fish could be caught merely by dropping a basket into the ocean. In the early 1500s, fishermen from France, Portugal, England, and the French and Spanish Basque Country began what was known as the migratory fishery. Countless Europeans relied on the dried cod to sustain them through the long winter months. The Newfoundland fishery also bolstered European economies. In port cities, thousands of men were employed in supplying and outfitting the fishery. By the mid-1500s, 6,000 fishermen from Spain's Basque region flocked to the Grand Banks each year. They processed tons of cod on board ship. By the late 1600s, France employed 20,000 men in the Newfoundland dried cod fishery. Meanwhile, England shipped out 25,000 fishermen each spring. In these early years, more Europeans were familiar with the island than with any other place in the New World. Each spring, hundreds of ships set out to Newfoundland for this migratory and seasonal fishery. After the month-long crossing, many of the vessels arrived to frozen harbors. Competition for good locations ashore was fierce, and captains would order their crews out in small boats to claim the best spots. In one terrible spring, 80 such boats capsized, and 250 men drowned in the frigid waters. Captains pushed their men to take such risks because it was an unwritten law of the fishery that the first ship into a harbor could claim the most advantageous site. Its captain also became the fishing admiral, whose job it was to settle disputes between crews from various countries. In Newfoundland, foreign visitors had to cooperate without laws.
Teams fished from small boats using hemp lines. Others processed the fish on shore, gutting, splitting, salting, and drying. Often, the men worked into the night. They had only 3 months to gather a profitable cargo before heading home. Back in France, they were paid from a share of the catch.
By the end of the 16th century, the Spanish Basque and Portuguese presence in Newfoundland was fading into insignificance, though these regions remained important markets for the fish. The English, with the largest fishery, gradually established the Avalon Peninsula as the heart of its fishery. And in the early 1700s, after France lost to England in war, the French fishery was confined to this northern coastline, called Le Petit Nord. These rare glass plate negatives, taken by a French naval officer in the 1850s, are some of Canada's earliest photographs. Hundreds of years after the French began fishing here, the fishing methods remained virtually the same.
The men gut and salt fish 18 to 20 hours a day. Cod heads and entrails are simply dumped into the harbor. The stench is wretched. For a few hours of sleep, the men sling up hammocks right where they clean the fish. A sail placed above is all that shields them from the weather.
Obscured faces, unknown names and stories, even young boys, a long way from home. In the mid-1700s, some of Le Petit Nord's seasonal fishing communities had up to 1,000 men. Over the years, the French fishery was slowly squeezed out by year-round settlement. And in 1904, France lost the right to catch and dry cod on Newfoundland altogether. Its more than 400-year presence on the island was over. Once a site was abandoned, the wooden sheds and fishing stages quickly deteriorated. Despite hundreds of years of occupation, signs of the migratory fishery simply vanished from these shores. La Scie is like so many communities along Le Petit Nord. Its French name survives, but other clues to its French past have long faded away. Here, charred stone along the shore indicates the site of an old iron forge. This variety of tree was imported from France. Its sap was used to heal water pups, painful blisters caused by working in salt water. Even La Scie's first permanent resident came here because of the French. In 1826, Irishman Daniel Duggan was hired by the French to guard their belongings after they departed for Europe in the fall. Duggan wrote of violent clashes between English and French fishermen over fishing territory. Proof of this can still be found in La Scie. Randolph Warren grew up with 3 French graves in his backyard. The cannonball marking each grave harkens back to English and French animosity. The cannonballs also tell of the fishermen's other great fear: pirates. Newfoundland was irresistible to pirates. Its seemingly endless coastline had no military protection. And with fishing stations in hundreds of coves, pirates could easily obtain provisions and crews. Even before reaching Newfoundland, European ships bound for the fishery became easy prey. Over the years, pirates took thousands of fishermen prisoner. A captive was given 3 options. He could accept the pirate's life, he could allow himself to be sold into slavery, or he could be killed. One of the most feared pirates in Newfoundland was Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart. Bart was ruthless, but ruthless with impeccable style. His trademark scarlet attire was accented by a plumed hat. Black Bart was openly homosexual. One Newfoundland recruit who rose in his ranks was John Walden, whose pirate name became Miss Nanny. In 1720, Black Bart sank and burned 21 ships in Trepassey Harbor alone. He carried off everything of value, crippling the fishing operation. At least 13 different pirate captains terrorized Newfoundland over the years. But the king of all Newfoundland pirates ruled in the early 1600s. His name was Peter Easton. This museum in Harbor Grace now stands on the site of what once was Pirate Peter Easton's fort. Easton commanded 40 ships, the largest pirate fleet in the world. Once while he was marauding on the Spanish Main, French Basque fishermen captured his fort at Harbor Grace. When he returned, a squadron of Basque ships engaged him in vicious battle. Though Easton was victorious, 47 men were not so lucky. They were slain in the battle and were buried along this stretch of shoreline called Bears Cove. Easton eventually left these barren coasts. Fabulously wealthy, he retired in comfort on the French Riviera. Not only men were buried on Newfoundland's remote shores. The legend persists that pirate treasure is hidden at places like Starve Rock near Trinity. These accounts of sunken ships, pirate battles, and treasure read like fantasy. A romance born from the island's mysterious and almost mythical shoreline. But pirates had their time in Newfoundland history. Following them was a new breed of adventurer who came to stay and to build. As pirate Easton wreaked havoc from his fort at Harbor Grace, not too far away at a place called Cupid's, the English attempted to build their very first permanent settlement. Governor John Guy hoped that the surrounding hills might hide the fledgling colony from the view of pirates, privateers, and marauding fishermen. In order to earn money for the colony's European investors, Governor Guy was interested in establishing trade with the Beothuk, Newfoundland's only indigenous people. In 1612, he embarked on a diplomatic mission, the first meeting with the natives.
Both savages passed over a little water stream, dancing, leaping and singing. The foremost of them presented a chain of leather full of small periwinkle shells, a splitting knife, and a feather that stuck in his hair.
After sharing a meal and good cheer, the two parties agreed to meet again when the grass was at a certain height. But in the terrible winter, 23 of Guy's colonists perished. Guy resigned as governor of Cupid's and headed home to England. He wasn't there to greet the Beothuk when they returned. Instead, it was fishermen who saw the Indians approach. Fearful, the fishermen fired warning shots from their cannon. For the Beothuk, the treachery signaled that Europeans could not be trusted. The Beothuk responded by avoiding further contact. As European settlement spread, this was to have tragic consequences for the Beothuk people's survival. As for the colony of Cupids, it was plagued by troubles and didn't last beyond 1632. English investors started 6 other colonies, but each was doomed to fail. Most promising of these was the colony of Avalon, established in 1621 at what is today the town of Ferryland. Fog, poor soil, and erratic winters made this Ferryland coast inhospitable to the settlers. But an even greater threat to the colony's survival was to be posed by war. Generations of fishermen in Ferryland passed on the story of the vanished colony. But as a town grew around the harbor, it was over 300 years before evidence of Avalon's turbulent past was discovered. Seen here is the former colony, now an archaeological dig. Dr. James Tuck is head archaeologist. To date, over 1 million artifacts have been unearthed here.
Wall also served as the wall for a big warehouse. It measures about 56 by 16 feet, where I suppose they stored supplies and stored fish, and where early on there was an alchemist or a gold finder at work in the far end, checking out the local rocks to see if there were any precious metals in them. I guess he wasn't lucky, but or he would have heard about that. Just this side of the flagstone pavement is a little rectangular basin that was the privy that was built as part of the original construction, and there are a couple of drains that go through the seawalls out into the pool. So the idea was that the tide would come in twice a day, every 12 hours, and kind of flush the toilet for you. It didn't work perfectly, fortunately for us, and there was a lot of stuff in there. All sorts of little squares of fabric that we suppose were the equivalent of toilet tissue and moss and so forth, lots of bones and seeds and the eggs of human intestinal parasites to things you can't explain, like a wheelbarrow down in the privy, and all sorts of things in between. Now what, Barry? What is it? Holy jeez. What's that, South Somerset?
I think so, in a bit of North Devon. Just
right next to it, yeah?
Well, you can see
just about every material known to human beings at that time has been found here. Ceramics, for example, from all over Europe, Italy and Portugal and France and Spain and the British Isles and Germany, the Rhineland, all sorts of things. So it's the whole, what's really exciting is the whole business, the architecture and the objects as well.
Each stone set by hand. Avalon's original road, perhaps the oldest in the country. Objects that help us envision daily life and clues to history. Why would someone leave a pot smashed on the floor unless they had to abandon their home in haste? It began as an ordinary day in 1696. People had their usual chores to tend to. The war between England and France seemed far away. Until, on the horizon, they appeared. French ships of war. In times of European war, Newfoundland was a target, because disrupting an enemy's cod source meant disrupting an enemy's economy. Avalon managed to ward off an earlier French attack, but this time the colony was not so fortunate. The French looted and set fire to Avalon, then shipped the dejected colonists back to England. Their dream of a home in the New World shattered. The invaders came from Plaisance, a fortified French colony brazenly situated close to English territory. By establishing a permanent presence in Newfoundland, the French aimed to better protect their migratory and Grand Banks fisheries. Plaisance had a strategic location. From on high, the French could easily spot English invaders, and the currents that shifted every 6.5 hours could thwart the enemy's seaward approach. Renamed Placentia, the town has barely begun uncovering the remnants of this early French occupation. After pursuing clues found in old records, archaeologists have discovered the remains of additional buildings up on this hill. Amanda Crompton is head archaeologist at this new site.
What you're looking at right now is the remains of a building associated with a 17th century fort. Dates roughly around 1660, near as we can tell right now. It's marked by several long stone walls. There's one long stone wall here, one there, then there's two connectors. These basically, what this was once was a dwelling. We're finding lots of pots and bowls and plates and things that you would have used every day just to get by, to live. We're finding lots of these inside, so I think it is a domestic structure. We're at present trying to find the fireplace, which I suspect is up in that end up there. There we go. This is a piece of wine bottle glass. Wine bottles were very common at the time, and they were all blown by hand, and they were blown into a big round shape with a slender neck at the top. This would have been somewhere near the base. Well, we think it might be, I think this pipe was made in Bristol in England, judging by the shape. And EB might be a man named Edward Battle, who was a pipe maker, as documented. This was also manufactured in the Saintonge region of France. We can tell this because of the color of the pottery itself. There are little tiny, what we call inclusions. There are little tiny bits of things in the pottery itself. There's mica and red hematite in Saintonge, as well as the color of the glaze. It's this bright sort of Kelly green color.
It's hard to imagine that this earth and rubble was once the heart of French power in Newfoundland. But it was from here that in the late 1600s the French had taken the colony of Avalon. That attack was one part of a brutal campaign to force the English out of Newfoundland. To lead the campaign, France sent the governor of Plaisance, a brilliant Montreal-born commander, Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville. In the fall of 1696, the governor of the colony and his troops embarked from Plaisance by ship, while d'Iberville and his contingent of soldiers and Abenaki Indians took an overland route to the English settlements. After slogging for 9 days, at times waist-deep in bog, d'Iberville's party arrived at the coast. They attacked Bay Bulls, then Petty Harbor, where they killed nearly 40 English fishermen. Reaching the outskirts of St. John's, the French troops slaughtered most of the Englishmen who lay in wait. The few English survivors retreated to join those hiding inside forts in St. John's. To terrorize the English into surrendering, the French scalped a man and sent him in. By the time the French were done with Newfoundland, hundreds of Englishmen had been taken prisoner. Hundreds were dead. Others just vanished from record. From St. John's, d'Iberville brought English Newfoundland to its knees, taking prisoners, killing and torching. He then departed, leaving all but 2 of the English settlements in smoking ruins. These symbols of violence now lie forgotten, but are reminders that this was once bloody ground. There were many years of conflict, but ultimately the French gains were lost. The 1713 Treaty of Utrecht confirmed England's ownership of Newfoundland. In all those years, the island had suffered greatly from European power games. As many as 16 European wars interrupted the Newfoundland fishery. With warfare and ever-present danger, even small outports had to maintain defenses. And for the migratory fishermen, war brought additional perils. England's global supremacy depended on the strength of its Royal Navy. The country relied on the Newfoundland fishery as a nursery and training ground for the tens of thousands of sailors required for naval warfare. Migratory and Grand Bank fishermen were well experienced in all conditions. In times of war, fishermen avoided English seaports. Press gangs were searching for thousands of sailors needed by the Royal Navy. There were years when this virtually shut down the Newfoundland fishery. The last battle between the English and French on Newfoundland took place in 1762. It ended with English victory. The following year, the 1763 Treaty of Paris stripped France of all its North American possessions, except for two small islands visible off the south coast of Newfoundland, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. They are the last bastions of France's more than 500-year presence on the continent. In the 1700s, immigrants from England and Ireland began establishing themselves in Newfoundland. But settlement was to prove slow and precarious. And since catching and drying cod required many hands, residents had to import laborers from England and Ireland. These transients came planning to earn money and return back home. In order to fill their vessels, the owners of ships that crossed the Atlantic made false promises of plentiful jobs in Newfoundland. Men arrived penniless. Some could find no work. Others worked but had trouble collecting their pay. Desperate for passage money home, many became robbers and bandits. In the early 1700s, Trinity Harbor's 30 resident families were inundated with about 300 unruly transient fishermen. But transient labor was needed if Trinity wanted to develop a prosperous fishery. The town became one of Newfoundland's strongest mercantile centers, selling about 40% of the island's cod. Its wealthy merchant princes lived in England. Some had never even set foot on the island. Benjamin Lester, the most powerful Trinity merchant, set a new trend. He lived in Newfoundland. He was also the Justice of the Peace, a difficult job in an era where hundreds of transients were drinking and brawling, and where roving gangs of brutal thugs were terrorizing resident families. There was rape and murder. Lester put up with Trinity's civil unrest because the Newfoundland cod was making him very rich. In the mid-1700s, he boasted the largest fleet in Newfoundland. Along with another Trinity firm, his company exported about 10 million pounds of dried cod per year. This was the beginning of a new era on Newfoundland. The migratory fishery was disappearing. In its place, permanent residents were now running their own fishing enterprises. By the 1800s, over 25,000 people lived on Newfoundland. Families set down roots. The island became home. These settlers were the first to begin calling themselves Newfoundlanders. Few were as wealthy as Lester. Most survived on the fish they caught and on what they could grow in their small gardens. Though little survives from Newfoundland's earliest settlers, the fishing community of Greats Cove still has many hectares of stone walls built by the Irish settlers who cleared this land. To enrich the barren soil, they carted up seaweed and fish offal from the shore. These newcomers found it nearly impossible to survive on Newfoundland without importing food staples and supplies from distant Britain. Unlike these recent arrivals, the Beothuk Indians had learned how to survive in this harsh place. Each season had its food: caribou and berries, rivers of salmon, seabirds and eggs, and an ocean of bounty, all in balance, until the Beothuk became the outsiders in their own land. The Beothuk had avoided contact with Europeans after their early experiences had ended in violence. After the migratory fishermen left for the season, the Indians picked up discarded items from beaches and stages. They created their first iron tools from nails. This was the only advantage Europeans were to give. Spreading European settlements had squeezed the Beothuk out of the coastal and river areas that were crucial for their survival. Trappers had also encroached on their territory further inland. The Beothuk were starving and dying from European diseases. By the early 1800s, fewer than 100 Beothuk people remained, and each year only brought further desperation. With no bridge of communication between the natives and white newcomers, the rift widened. When old John Peyton's property went missing, he and a party headed out in pursuit of the thieves. After shooting at a group of Beothuk Indians, Peyton bludgeoned a wounded Beothuk man to death with a trap the Indian had stolen. When some Beothuks cut loose a loaded boat belonging to Peyton Jr., the governor agreed that Peyton should retrieve his belongings and should take a Beothuk person captive. It was time to force open communication. In March 1819, Peyton's party captured a woman, Demasduit. She had recently given birth and could not run as fast as the others. Demasduit's husband gestured in a friendly way to get her back. But when the whites started dragging her away, he grabbed at her and was stabbed with a bayonet. When he tried to wrest a knife from one of the men, he was shot. He uttered a yell that made the woods echo. Demasduit was renamed Mary March. Her gentleness and intelligence surprised many. However, hopes that she could bridge relations between whites and natives were lost when she died of tuberculosis. Her body was taken up the Exploits River and left at Red Indian Lake. The Beothuk placed her beside her husband. Her baby had died only days after her capture. In 1823, trappers captured another woman, Shaunadithit, along with her mother and sister, who were in frail condition. After they died, Shaunadithit was taken in by a white family. Renamed Nancy April, Shaunadithat was encouraged to share her experiences and knowledge. Here she drew a portion of the Exploits River and marked where her people died, where her family members were shot, and where others had died from starvation or disease. Shaunadithat knew that her people were on the verge of extinction. She drew their food: dried salmon, meat, lobster tails, seal, a bark container for boiling eggs, a glimpse into the mythology of the Beothuk. Home. In June 1829, after 6 years in captivity, the young woman Shaunadithat died of tuberculosis. She was the last of the Beothuk people. Newfoundland's moody hills, its windswept shores and turbulent waters have seen much by the early 1800s. Tens of thousands of fishermen, pirates, war, and the decimation of a people. It's a harsh land. The English and Irish settlers who began claiming this island as home were clinging to a rock at the edge of a powerful sea. Their perseverance and determination would come to mark the spirit of the Newfoundland people.